Hey babes, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Brandy. I am the host of the Be Real Babe show. And today, you guys, it is Monday if you're watching this live, so that means we are keeping up with Canada. Now, I do have to initially apologize because obviously, as you can probably hear from my voice, I am sick. As you guys know, I alluded to before going on a trip, and I did take my trip to Hawaii, and now I'm being punished for being back in cold Canada. So apologies if I sound nasally, but at least I'm here, I'm showing up, and I do my best to not be a disgusting germ. But today, you guys, I have 3 different stories for you, all kind of different. Some stuff that I've touched on in the past, some that I haven't before that I thought was kind of interesting that happened while I was gone. One article we're going to go over is about a CSIS investigation claiming that 1 in 10 of their terrorism investigations have to do with minors and kids. So I thought that was interesting. And there's also news that Guilbeault left from Carney's Liberal cabinet. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And I also want to talk about an article that came out saying that BC firefighters have seen the most overdoses that they've seen in a long time. And I just wanted to go over that because it's something that is very concerning that we don't seem to be addressing here in Canada too much. So if you're interested in listening to that, stick around and we'll jump right in. Okay, guys, as mentioned, we got 3 stories today. So I wanted to start with one. The title just kind of caught me off guard. It was from CBC News and it was written on the 13th of November. Nearly 1 in 10 terrorism investigations at CSIS involves a minor. So I thought that was super interesting because I can kind of see that happening, just the way the climate and everything is so radicalized these days. And because they have more access to social media and there's more and more people speaking about their opinions, let's say politically, or about things that are definitely more controversial more than ever, I do think that's going to have some repercussions in the younger generation because kids are always listening, right? I don't think that's a shock to anybody. I think if you have kids or been around kids, they absorb things. I don't, but I just have been around them. And I know that they absorb things. So definitely if you're talking about these kind of things more and more in your home as well, without thinking about it, sometimes your kids could be adopting that same verbiage or those thought patterns, or maybe they're listening to some gamers and they're talking about their political opinion. It's kind of coming in on all ends right now. So I wasn't entirely shocked that this was a title, but I thought we could go over this article. So, the head of Canada's spy agency is warning about a worrying number of young people becoming radicalized. In his first annual address, Canadian Security Intelligence Service Director Dan Rogers said violent extremism, be it motivated by religion or ideological or political views, persists as one of Canada's most significant national security concerns. Now, I know if you are on, let's say, the more conspiratorial, forward thinking, questioning everything, and you're seeing what's happening in the UK with digital ID. I know a lot of this stuff too. You want to be careful. Obviously, we don't want kids to be being a part of this extremism online, but then at what point is it starting to become now mass surveillance in different ways? Where do these slippery slopes happen? And we usually see it when it's trying to protect the kids, let's say, which I don't disagree with. But even hearing Roblox coming out with kids and people having to scan their faces to play their game still kind of makes me a bit nervous. But I have no trust. I digress. But I was trying to take some of these things with at face value because there is definitely a dangerous part growing of concern when you get into an echo chamber and that cult like mentality. At the same time, when we start being picky of what people can say and what they can't say, we also see some of our freedoms go away, right? So there's got to be hopefully a middle ground we can find here. But let's continue. Worryingly, nearly 1 in 10 terrorism investigations at SCIS now includes at least one subject of investigation under the age of 18, Rogers said to a crowd of invited guests at the National Arts Centre in downtown Ottawa. He pointed to an August case where a minor was arrested in Montreal for allegedly planning an attack on behalf of Daesh, also known as ISIS. A few months earlier, the RCMP arrested a 15-year-old Edmonton area minor for alleged links to an online network of violent extremism known as 764. The network is known for preying on children and youth. And I do believe that there was an episode of Sean Ryan that was out that they did talk about 764 more. So definitely go look at that. And I will also link my video about this where I talked about there was a Vancouver father that I had found that his daughter had unfortunately been a part of this cult, and some bad things definitely happened to that family, and so he was raising concerns. That's what kind of got me into it. So definitely look into the 764 cult if you want to dive in more. Those are good places to start. And this part does scare me. I do agree. The RCMP has also charged 2 15-year-olds in Ottawa for allegedly plotting a mass casualty attack against the Jewish community. And a lot of the times too, we're just seeing these kids fall in echo chambers and not really knowing, right, what's necessarily right or wrong. They just get so hopped up on their emotions and, they haven't fully developed yet. And I can't imagine what it's like to get information as a teenager with such crazy hormones and emotions. And I'm not saying all, but a lot, especially the ones that are feeling probably lost and now are feeling like a group and then fall into an echo chamber. I do believe no matter what side you are, no matter who you are, that can be dangerous because, again, some adults don't have obviously full developed brains and just have smooth brains, but definitely as you're younger, things definitely will seem like reactions will seem more validated than when you get older to understand that that's not always the right thing. Violent extremists are motivated by an often personalized set of beliefs, said Rogers, including xenophobia, accelerationism, nihilism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, extreme interpretations of religion, and more. Again, this is where I agree we want to look at the violent extremists, but then, we always know how people go too far and always take more. So I always think this is a dance to try and protect and not have these psychopaths go crazy online. At the same time, what does that take away from others and what does that lay the groundwork for in the future? They find inspiration and motivation in the events and trends that polarize society and cause them to lose hope for the future, said Rogers, and they easily access and amplify the content online that radicalizes them and reinforces their view that violence is justified to achieve their extremist goals. And this happens on both sides in any sort of thing. Doesn't matter, I think, what religion, where you are in the world, your class, and all of those different attributes. I think that happens extremism everywhere, and everyone needs to be aware of it. I don't think there's one group that's not absolved of this type of behavior or the ability to. But when they do, the consequences are devastating. The SCIS director said since 2014, there have been 20 violent extremist attacks in Canada, resulting in 29 deaths and at least 60 victims, and credited his employees and law enforcement for stopping more. Eroding social cohesion, increasing polarization, and significant global events provide fertile ground for radicalization, and many who turn to violence radicalizing exclusively online, often without directions from others. They use technology to do so secretly and anonymously, seriously challenging the ability of investigators to keep pace and to identify and prevent acts of violence, which I can imagine that makes their jobs hard, especially with like bot farms and stuff like that. And, what's real, what's not. I can imagine that that's a difficult balance of figuring out what is a threat, what's not, because you don't want to let go of everything. At the same time, you don't have resources to follow up with everything. And like there are bot farms and crazy people that know so much technology. The speech also touched on foreign interference and espionage, noting both China and Russia are interested in what goes on in Canada's Arctic. China said Rogers is seeking an economic foothold in the region, while Russia's Arctic posture remains unpredictable and aggressive. China also continues to target Canada for classified and sensitive information. Chinese spies have tried to recruit Canadians with access to government plans, intentions, information, and military expertise through social media and online job platforms. Then what? Anyways, different topic, different day. CSIS has warned about the risks of Chinese foreign interference for years now. The latest comments from the intelligence agency comes as Prime Minister Mark Carney appears determined to repair relationships with Beijing. Carney held a bilateral meeting with Chinese president on the sidelines of Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit last month, marking the first formal leader-to-leader contact between the two nations since 2017. I understand making good with, but interesting choices. I don't know, as an enemy that you want to be a friend, you want them to not know you're an enemy kind of situation, or what's happening here? Asked what conversations CSIS is having with Carney about China, Rogers said the agency's role is unchanged. We provide the government with intelligence and advice on national security threats. This has not stopped and continues very actively, he said. I would say that as the shifting nature of relationships between Canada and China, or Canada and any other country, evolve, we're going to have to evolve our operations to make sure that the right intelligence gets to the government. Well, that's good. Canadians asked to be eyes wide open on data storage. He also raised the issue of data storage, noting vast amount of Canadians' data are increasingly being held outside of Canada. These armed state who may choose to act against Canada's interests with ways to weaponize data and information. Asked to elaborate during the media questions and answer period, he said the government may need to consider policy, there it is, which is outside of SCIS's lane. The fix will be complicated, he said. When we've spoken publicly about certain types of data, it has to be able to make sure that Canadians' eyes are wide open on where they're putting their data and what kind of platform and who that data is under control of. The former director of SCIS, David Vinault, was vocal in his concerns about TikTok, saying there's a very clear strategy on part of the government of China to collect personal information. It's Rogers' first speech since he took helm of the spy agency late last year. His predecessor started the transition during his tenure. My intent is not to alarm. I want to reassure Canadians that SCIS and the rest of Canada's security and intelligence community is here and working tirelessly in their best interests. CSIS will continue to prioritize deliberately and ruthlessly and become comfortable with an extraordinary pace of change. Well, there you go. So that's interesting. I'm not disagreeing with any of these things, obviously, because I think it's important on national security, but I also just, you always get worried of where those things going to be going. And the fact that it's 1 out of 10 is someone under the age of 18 is also alarming. Like, thank God it's not more than that. But at the same time, like, what are these kids getting a part of? Like, before 18, what are they a part of? I don't know. I just don't think it's best for young kids to be involved in politics, like know about them, understand how the system works. But I just don't think that until kids can think clearly, they should get into politics. That's why there's a voting age, right? It's good to know about it, but when on either side, kids are just repeating what their parents say without having any knowledge or experience themselves, like I think all of us can agree that we know people like that who are raised like that, and I'm sure we all have been that way. And then you grow up and you're like, oh, I realize that maybe my ideas are a bit different than my parents or whatnot, right? You should be able to understand. I think what's lacking more in education for kids these days is how the system works and all those things, because then it does breed extremism, especially if maybe you don't align with your kids, and then all of a sudden they're going to school and they're going to this group, and this group is extreme about for whatever it is that hates against you. Like we've seen it a few times, and then technology just exacerbates it, makes it worse, right? So I think kids should understand politics, understand how things work in the world in a way, but I just don't think we should have opinions being forced down their throats at this age where they don't have any live experience and just run off emotion and what they see on TikTok. So the next one, wanted to talk about Guilbeault, Stephen Guilbeault, whatever the fuck, decision to resign from Mark Carney's cabinet. And I did read something interesting that when someone left Pierre's cabinet, or when someone left Pierre's party, everyone was kind of freaking out about it and saying, oh, this is, it's because he's divisive. But where's the same fight, with here, when there's actually a lot of people upset about Mark Carney's recent decisions, but we'll get into that next week. But let's go through the timeline of Guilbeault's decision to resign from Mark Carney's cabinet. So this is more recent. This is from the 28th. Quebec Liberal MP Stephen Guilbeault resigned from cabinet on Thursday after spending all 6 years he has been a member of parliament around the table. The final decision was made in the last few days, but it was a choice that was months in the making. Canadian press spoke to a source with knowledge of the week's event who spoke on background of the days leading up to the decision. Here's a timeline and how it unfolded. So on the 23rd, Guilbeault came into politics after decades-long career as an environmentalist and activist, including the founder of Quebec's Equiterre organization. He left that organization in 2018 and a few months later won the nomination to run for the Liberals in Montreal and a Montreal riding under the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He won the riding for the Liberals in 2019, September. Guilbeault was initially the Heritage Minister and was moved to the environmental file after 2021 election. Under his leadership there, the federal government moved on multiple regulations and climate policies. Those included legislation to enshrine Canada's emission goals and regulate including oil and gas emission caps, electric vehicle sale mandates, methane reductions from oil production, and clean electricity regulations to get Canada's grid to net zero initially by 2035, a date that was later pushed to 2050. And I'm sure it's going to keep getting pushed out because I don't believe we're going to be able to ever get that. But that doesn't mean that we don't. Anyways, Guilbeault endorsed Carney for the Liberal leadership on January 21st, saying Carney had led through economic crises in Canada and in the UK. I know he's the right person to help bring us into the next phase of our work to support Canadians, to build a strong economy, and to fight climate change, he said at the time. Wah, wah. About a month later, that commitment was tested as Carney said he would eliminate consumer carbon pricing, a policy Guilbeault has taken political heat to defend over previous years. Despite that, Guilbeault's endorsement remained intact. When Carney became prime minister, he kept Guilbeault in cabinet even as he moved aside several other more left-leaning MPs who had been in Trudeau's cabinet. However, he did move Guilbeault out of the environment portfolio and turned him to heritage under the new name Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity. He left Guilbeault with the responsibility for Parks Canada and also made him his Quebec lieutenant. Serious reservations about Carney's climate commitment began to bubble this fall as his government refused to talk about emission targets, and talk of backing a new oil pipeline as a major project began to go public. Discussion of a new pipeline became more pronounced as Carney began referring projects to Major Project Office this fall, and negotiations with Alberta on a new climate and energy pact proceeded. Guilbeault had made Carney and his staff aware as early as the spring that federal backing for a pipeline would make it very hard for Guilbeault to remain in cabinet, but he, like many other Liberals, was watching to see what would happen. Guilbeault, no longer in the environmental seat at the cabinet table, was not part of those negotiations. CBC broke news of the details of a new memorandum of understanding Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith were set to sign on November 27th. It was the first time Guilbeault and other Liberals got to see what was really on the table and the scale of the pullback from environmental policies, including clean electricity regulations, without an equivalent or subsequent increase in industrial pricing, and opening the door to exempting a new pipeline from the oil tanker ban of BC's coast. I've got so many words and so little things I want to say. I just want to set this one up. I'm sitting here eating my popcorn. Guilbeault sought a briefing from Carney's office on the measure in the MOU and received one. Among those at the briefing were Marc-Andre Blanchard and Christian Fox, the Deputy Clerk, Associated Secretary to Cabinet. The briefing took place prior to the Cabinet meeting, which was scheduled to begin at 3:30 p.m., much later than the Cabinet meeting normally starts at the time of 10 a.m. Reporters began to hear rumblings of Guilbeault's concern about the MOU. He arrived for the Cabinet meeting stone-faced and brushed past reporters without a word. Ooh, he mad. A few minutes later, he walked out again, saying nothing, and met briefly with the Housing Minister, Gregory Robertson, in an office down the hall. Eventually, Guilbeault returned to the Cabinet meeting. Following the conclusions, reporters saw him in the hallway behind the Cabinet area doors, appearing unhappy. He met with Carney for an hour following that meeting. He did not resign, but expressed his concerns with the MOU. So on the 26th, he received a written copy of the MOU, and it included not only the pulling back of multiple regulations to cut emissions, but it also included language extending eligibility for federal investment tax credit to enhance oil recovery projects. Originally, the federal tax credits excluded enhanced oil recovery and a carbon storage technology that captures carbon dioxide from industrial emitters and injects it back underground at oil fields. That increases pressure and pushes more oil out of the rock. That carbon dioxide is trapped underground and allows for increased production from oil fields. Adding enhanced oil recovery to tax credits is considered by environmental leaders, including Guilbeault, to be a direct subsidy for oil production, and it was purely excluded from the original tax credits for that reason. Guilbeault and Green Party leader Elizabeth May had both heard rumors before the federal budget was tabled that it was going to amend the tax credit to include enhanced oil recovery. It was one of the biggest things keeping May from supporting the budget. Guilbeault got some assurance that would not be in the budget and added to it after, and was dispatched by the PMO to convince May to vote with the Liberals. She voted with the government on the budget on November 17th, the only non-Liberal MP to do so. There's so much tea, man. Guilbeault wrote to Carney on Wednesday night informing him that the MOU as it stood, he could not stay in the cabinet. He spoke to both Carney and Blanchard in Calgary, who formally resigned his cabinet seat on the 27th. Despite this difficult economic context, I remain one of those from whom environmental issues must remain front and center, he said. This is why I strongly oppose the memorandum of understanding between the federal government and the government of Alberta. Bye. Come on. Work with. Why aren't we working with? Why are we always trying to work against? I would love to know. Let's just work with them. Why can't we be a prosperous Canada? Why can't we continue doing the clean things that we do? Not as clean as it can't be perfect, but I think there's a lot of other industries we can go after. Like the fact that recycling is just burned most of the time. Is that not a problem? Things like that? No, we're just going to go after the one resource that a lot of people in the world are. Anyway, let's get on to the last one. Again, so sorry if this is a short one and I sound like crap. I'm trying my best to get through these, and then we're going to make it through all 3 stories. So thank you guys for sticking around. I really hope the next episode I am not feeling this way, or that's it. I'm going back to Hawaii and I'm never coming back to Canada. So BC health authorities see fatal overdose spike in recent weeks. So November 27, 2025. So health authorities across BC are warning of an increase in 911 calls related to a non-fatal overdoses in recent weeks. The First Nations Health Authority, Fraser Health, and Canada Coastal Health have reported a higher number of drug poisonings due to a number of factors, including the presence of a contaminant called medetomidine. According to Dr. Mark Lissincian, VCH Deputy Chief Medical Health Officer, medetomidine is a veterinary drug with a version also approved for humans called dexamethasone. Fuck, I'm so glad I'm not in medical shit. Which can be administered in the intensive care unit. It's a very potent medication. It's very toxic and it's used basically to sedate people in the emergency department. So you can imagine if someone taking that drug on the street is going to make them very sedated and very sleepy, which definitely is obviously super scary with all the other drugs that people are doing these days. It's like, are they just on this? Are they actually dying? Are they actually passed out? Like, what is happening? Why, again, are all these nasty kind of drugs hitting the streets? Despite the increase in calls over the last few weeks, Lecision said non-fatal overdoses are continually to trend downward provincially and nationally. Even in these recent weeks where we've seen the ambulances called twice as high as they might normally be, the deaths are half as high as they were a year ago. Oh, maybe because you've walked back some of the shit and made drugs not good again? Just a thought. Dr. Rahul Walia, the medical health officer at Fraser Health, said the rise has been fairly sudden, coinciding with that change in the drug supply. Not only are we seeing the drug medetomidine pop up more often, we're seeing it pop up at a higher concentrations in the unregulated drug supply, he said. It's approximately 200 times more potent than xylazine, he added, referring to another sedative used by veterinarians. Walia is encouraging people not to use drugs alone and instead utilize overdose prevention services as well as drug checking facilities. How about we just don't do drugs at all? Let's advise to not do drugs at all. I think that's a good start. Let's just add that in there too. Like, just don't do drugs at all. Andrew Giesbrecht, the outreach supervisor at Union Gospel Mission, said the team at UGM is responding to around 3 overdoses every few weeks as of late. It fluctuates, but it's been very hectic, he said. Giesbrecht added the presence of medetomidine has made reversing an opioid overdose with naloxone much more challenging. With these very confused mixtures, nothing will happen, he said, or we might have somebody just stay down for a very, very long time. So it's very deadly and very dangerous. Matthew Trudeau with the Vancouver Fire Rescue Services said it's something firefighters are also dealing with as well, where before historically people would kind of come up from an overdose in a predictable way. It seems like they're staying down for much longer, kind of needing more resources and more time. Trudeau said on November 21st, firefighters responded to 54 overdoses, the most VFRS has ever seen in a day. The increase is obviously the amount of is unprecedented. We've never seen numbers like this before. And the shitty thing is, I swear, when sometimes I feel like they think they just get to a new drug, figure out what is taking over, and all of a sudden there's another one. And this is where I struggle with pharmaceuticals because I understand there's a lot of other drugs out there that you can take. But it always seems like all these chemical ones are always the ones that are being given out in certain circumstances, and then people are fiending for them after, and then they go get a synthetic version of it and they get hooked to something else. It always seems to be like the pipeline, like, why are we ever talking about the pharma to street drug pipeline ever? Like, I don't know, I hear that all the time. I just don't know why that's never talked about. But it's like, I'm not saying modern medicine isn't needed. I'm just saying, like, I just wish people with addictive personalities and stuff like that are aware of what they're taking before they get into something like that, because sometimes after, especially maybe not so much here in Canada, but in the States, if you don't have the insurance for it and then you're going to go look for the cheaper version with the same high or the same amount, it gets very dangerous. And then when we're taking stuff that is sedatives at the vet. Like, I don't think taking sedatives is one thing. I know I was very against people being upset about using ivermectin, but that's different than a sedative that's going to take you out when you're just trying to, like, help your body with some things, versus getting numb the fuck out with a sedative. So it's just like, when do we stop this? When I'm really glad to see that they walked back a lot of these policies when it comes to drug abuse in BC, but it still seems like a lot of the things that they're trying to do to prevent are not helping. And I just wonder, when's the line, at what point do we try something new? But I digress. Anyways, thank you so much, guys. I hope you like my attire. It's going to be trying to be Christmas from here on out. We got a couple weeks left as of this launches as December 1st. So happy December. I hope you guys had a great November. And I hope if you celebrate Christmas in the holiday season that you are in the spirit. If not, I think if you just go watch a movie or sing a Christmas song or wear an outfit, you will feel in the Christmas spirit. And if not, let me know and I'll try and send you an elfgram or something like that. Just kidding. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. I hope you like this episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next week. Hopefully not as sick this time. Bye, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Until next time, bye.